In our first video, we talked about the what and the why of hybrid working. In this video, video 2 of 5, we're going to talk about inclusion and the types of things that we need to consider before implementing hybrid working. When thinking about the employee experience, one of the absolute fundamentals that need to be considered is the concept of inclusion. Before we think about what inclusion looks like in a hybrid environment, let's just be really clear about what we mean by that word. Put really simply, diversity doesn't mean inclusion. Instead, diversity is about the what. It focuses on the makeup of your workforce. Inclusion, on the other hand, is about the how, the creation of a work environment and culture that enables all employees to participate and thrive. There are, of course, lots of factors to take into account when thinking about inclusivity in your workplace. Only you know the makeup of your workforce. However, what I'm going to talk to you about over the coming slides is some of the top priorities for inclusivity and considerations that you need to be thinking about when implementing this into your workplace. The first thing I'd like to talk to you about is gender in the workforce. There is a disproportionate caring responsibility placed onto the female demographic. What this now means is that women are more likely to adopt working from home. Men, on the other hand, have more flexibility as a result of this to be visible in the workplace. Now, on the face of it, that shouldn't be a problem. However, unfortunately, what we have seen through the research is that there's a disproportionate sway in the direction of people that are visible. These people are more likely to get progression, they're more likely to get development, and they're more likely to be more highly thought of. We need to be aware of this prejudice and this bias when we're designing our hybrid planning. One of the potential solutions offered to this is to encourage your male workforce to work remotely more often. Professor Carrie Cooper, psychologist and president of the CIPD, says that if they don't, meaning if men don't work from home, then we will have a problem, as women will be working substantially from home and the men will go in more days a week than the women, and that will adversely affect their career. So really, this poses a question. Do we have a responsibility to make sure that there's more equality in the uptake of hybrid working? Recent research from the CMI has found that our disabled workforce are 1.3 times more likely than our non-disabled workforce to adopt working from home. This could largely be due to the fact that it's easier to manage certain conditions and energy levels when working remotely. The third and final group I'd like us to think about today are our young workers. A huge survey carried out by Universum of over 221,000 young people in work found that 57% of them worry about being isolated. There are concerns about being omitted from key meetings, difficulties with onboarding due to a lack of guidance or ad hoc support, and a lack of modelling, watching good leadership. Now might be a good time to pause. Collect your thoughts. Think about some of the groups that we've discussed. Are there groups within your organisation that you need to take a temperature check with, find out how they're feeling, what they might need from you? What's the makeup of your organisation? Are you clear on it? Write down some ideas now, things that you might need to go away and find out, or things that concern you. Press pause and replay when you're ready. Inclusivity in the workplace is not just a buzzword. It's something that we all strive for. How do we make sure our workplace is inclusive in a hybrid environment? Well, one of the key things to think about is the idea that really, if you get inclusivity right for one, you get it right for all. We've tried to whittle this down into 6 key areas of consideration, starting with informal training and development. Your young and/or female employees are statistically more likely to prefer remote work, according to research carried out by PwC. They're also the ones more likely to face long-term advancement challenges. Now, formal training is fairly simple to execute remotely. It's the ad hoc learning opportunities that are created in the office that are difficult to replicate virtually. We need to be conscious of this when considering development or career advancement opportunities, building in opportunities for this ad hoc training. Yes, we are here to perform a function. We are paid to carry out a role, but we are all people. We have things that are important to us, events and dates that we hold dear, things that make up our identities. Being in an inclusive environment should mean that those things are recognised and understood, because they are what matters to us. Mark important dates in the calendar, thinking about creative ways to ensure important religious and cultural days are marked, even with people working virtually. It's a good way to ensure people feel seen and included. Simply being aware who celebrates which events and holidays and acknowledging these through group calendars or emails can help all employees feel included. Try to create a mix of online and in-person events that could also be considered to mark these, such as things to do with Pride or Black History Month, for example. We've talked a little bit about some of the protected characteristics that we need to keep in the forefront of our minds when building an inclusive workforce. However, we are all different. We all have natural preferences that are outside of those protected characteristics. There are times when you have to make decisions without consensus, unpopular decisions. You have to prioritise the task. We get it, life in the middle is not easy. However, getting to know the makeup of your teams means you can play to their strengths and build more trust and cohesion. Some of your team, for example, will be introverted and reflective. Call them later in the day after a meeting to find out what their true thoughts were now they've had time to think and reflect. Your extroverts might need more contact, more time to talk things over. Try to make a bit more time for this. Knowing these nuances means that you'll notice when something isn't quite right. Is someone suddenly quite quiet when they used to be very vocal? Is someone getting irritable when they're usually quite laid back? It's these things that foster a feeling of inclusivity and trust. There's no getting away from the fact that we now live in a dual reality, an in-person and a virtual one. We now have access to intimate details of people's homes. Their choice of artwork or wallpaper is almost becoming as familiar as our own. However, this window into people's personal lives can create unintentional bias. For example, a chaotic workspace or a faulty Wi-Fi connection could give a manager or a team member an unfair impression of someone else. This can lead to microaggressions, perhaps even bullying and harassment. It may become more of an issue through video calls. Communicating as little heads in virtual boxes can make people feel more disconnected and therefore perhaps more likely to say something offensive or inappropriate. Without in-person contact and having those important social cues, it can be harder for managers to spot the problems. It's really important that any microaggressions, when spotted, can be dealt with immediately. Intervening in the moment and publicly is vital to ensure this sort of behaviour is never deemed acceptable. We need to be aware of such a thing as online representation. The fifth consideration is connection. Making team building and mentoring hybrid friendly. With a return to the office, even if only part-time, it's understandable that managers will try to go back to organising events and support in person. After all, it's what we know, it's what we're used to. But there's a real risk that those working from home will miss out. This could lead to an us versus them culture, with regular office goers and the stay-at-homers being separate from each other. Failing to plan proper hybrid events which let everyone participate no matter where they're based could lead to a divided workforce, the creation of an insider and outsider group bias. To ensure that you are factoring in team members who prefer to work virtually when planning and running team events, make sure everyone is included. Ensure that the type of event accommodates the different interests and cultures of the team. Take feedback, what's working for people and what isn't. With so many people working more remotely, when it comes to performance management, we need to be aware of proximity bias. In order to avoid this, we need to rely more on metrics, measurable output and consistent feedback on deliverables. Subjective feedback needs to be balanced with objective data. As an added bonus, if we get this right, this will address other forms of bias when it comes to considering performance management, including preferential treatment on the basis of race, gender, sexual orientation, among others. We go on to talk about performance management in more detail shortly. Really good point. Hit the pause button, take a breather. Jot down some ideas. What are the current uptake numbers for hybrid working in your organisation? How are you going to monitor it moving forward? What might you do to protect the development of all? Once you've jotted down some of your initial ideas or questions, hit play. Part of developing a truly inclusive environment is challenging misconceptions. When it comes to hybrid working, there is a sense across some companies that new starters, poor performers, and those under resignation need to be in the office. Now, this approach may have merit in some circumstances, but the approach of "I must be able to see you to know that you're working" is a really outdated one, and one that's widely accepted to be a flawed approach. Instead, we need to be considering a move away from presenteeism and towards output, which we'll come on to later. The decision to adopt hybrid working should be fundamentally based on the question, what are the conditions for success? If those conditions are enabled by some degree of remote work or total remote working, then what is the value in demanding office working? If expectations are clear, objectives are identified and met, then what is really being achieved by withholding it? You may be sat here concerned about your poor performers, for example, but studies have shown that productivity often increases with remote working. And let's face facts, a bum in a seat does not make someone suddenly work harder or better. Clear expectations, objective monitoring, development and communication improve performance, all of which can be done remotely. Are you worried that your colleague that's exiting the business is going to drop the ball because they've resigned? Well, this comes down to trust. If this person has a history of integrity, of working hard and maintaining good working relationships, you have no reason to suspect that that will suddenly come to a grinding halt. If anything, what you want to work hard to preserve is a lasting sense of the relationship. If this has been a pleasant experience for you and for them, you want to preserve that. You want to make sure that they leave the business feeling valued, that the handover has been handled with sensitivity, and that overall they leave with a feeling that they have done their best and that you have observed that. By denying certain groups access to hybrid working, even though their jobs are suited to it, what you've essentially done is turned hybrid working into a perk, which means that to deny it becomes a punishment. By challenging this perk versus punishment binary, it helps to remove the potential for stigma between those who regularly attend the office and those who don't. There is the real potential for an us versus them dynamic to emerge if the purpose of hybrid working is not made absolutely clear and does not filter through to how decisions are made around it. That concludes our discussion around inclusion in the hybrid ecosystem. This has been video 2 of 5. Please feel free to head over and look at our third video on trust in the hybrid ecosystem. Thank you for listening.